Now we'll talk about now another unit in ecology, that is biodiversity here now. Biodiversity is the diversity of organisms at various levels in a biosphere or in a particular community can be called biodiversity. It is the diversity of different kinds of organisms of a particular species, diversity among species in a community, diversity at ecosystem level, or diversity at biome level or in biosphere level. At the various levels you find the organisms exhibiting diversified characteristic features that can be called biodiversity here now. Now the biodiversity is broadly divided into three types here now. Genetic diversity, that is gene biodiversity, species biodiversity, ecological biodiversity. Now gene biodiversity or genetic biodiversity, the first one here now, it is a diversity of genes of a particular species, you know. Even if you take the animals of a particular species living in a particular habitat, having a common ancestor, they have got the genes with different types of characteristic features, you know. Even for a particular trait here now, the genes present in that particular species may be diversified here now. And the genetic diversity increases with the environmental variability, you know. If the environmental conditions differ from area to area, the genetic diversity also increases, you know. Genetic diversity usually occurs during recombination or as a result of mutations during sexual reproduction. During sexual reproduction, as a result of recombination or as a result of mutations, you know, genetic diversity occurs in a particular species, you know. Now for instance, Rauwolfia vomitaria, a plant called Rauwolfia vomitaria that grows in Himalayan region, it gives an alkaloid called reserpine, you know. The potency and the concentration of reserpine varies from plant to plant living in a large geographical area of Himalayan region, you know. It is because of the gene or genetic diversity. In the same way, because of the genetic diversity, in India there are nearly 1000 varieties of rice and nearly there are 500 varieties of mangoes, you know. 500 varieties of mangoes. So all mangoes belong to the same species or the family, but still their characteristics are different here now with regard to taste, then rate of fertilization, so on and so forth. Is because of the diversity of the genes, you know. And different varieties of rice again reflects the presence of different types of genes, you know. That can be called gene diversity or genetic diversity, you know. The next is the species diversity here now. It is a diversity of species in a particular habitat, you know. If we take a particular habitat, that may be abound with the animals of different types of species, you know. So more the number of different types of species, you know, highest is the diversity in a particular ecological region, you know. Species diversity is measured by the two characteristics, like number one, species richness and species evenness. Species richness is the presence of different types of species in a particular habitat. You can say the particular diversity, if it has got diversified or different types of species, you know, that we would say that that particular habitat is rich in the species, you know. That can be called species richness, you know. Like the best example for the species richness is biodiversity hotspots. Biodiversity hotspots are the patches of ecological regions over a globe here now, where diversified types of fauna and flora are present in a particular habitat, which are identified as biodiversity hotspots, you know. So that tells us about the species richness, you know. Then species richness usually increases from northern hemisphere to the equator here now, increases from northern hemisphere to the equator, decreases from the equator to southern hemisphere here now. Usually at low-lying areas, species richness is very high because of prevalence of more amount of sunlight, abundance of minerals and all other resources, and abundance of water, So more amount of water and longer solar radiation and abundance of minerals and other resources, influence, the species richness in the low-lying areas, Then the species evenness is relative abundance of a particular species, Even if the animals are of different types of species are present in habitat if each species is represented by only one or two organisms, that cannot be considered as a species richness, So species richness indirectly depends upon species evenness, that is relative abundance of a particular species in habitat, can be called species evenness, When the species evenness is more or high, species richness also increases, Like for instance, a particular habitat there are more number of antelopes, there are more number of deers, there are more number of other fauna, Then you can say that because of more species evenness, that particular area is rich in its habitat. So species richness and species evenness are directly proportional to each other. When the evenness is more, richness also increases in a particular habitat, Otherwise, if when species evenness is less, that area cannot be considered as species rich area, Then another attribute of the species richness is species endemism, A species biodiversity is species endemism. It is the presence of a particular species being confined to a habitat, Certain organisms, instead of being present all over the world, instead of exhibiting cosmopolitan distribution, they get confined to only certain areas, So if any animal or a plant is restricted to only a particular habitat on the globe, then that can be considered as species endemism, For instance, you take Gavialis gangeticus, which is commonly called gharial. It is endemic only to Ganges and tributaries of Ganges in India, which is called species endemism, So species richness, species evenness, and species endemism are the attributes of species biodiversity, The next is ecological biodiversity. Next we talk about ecological biodiversity. It is diversity of different types of ecosystems, or diversity within an ecosystem and diversity of several ecosystems in a particular geographical area. That can be called ecological biodiversity. Now ecological biodiversity is again of three types, Alpha biodiversity. Alpha biodiversity is the diversity of species within a single ecosystem. Diversity of the species, that is species richness and species evenness, when you take into account with regard to a single ecosystem, that can be called alpha biodiversity, The next you have beta biodiversity, It is a diversity of two ecosystems. If you take species richness and species evenness, or biodiversity of the species in two ecosystems which are nearby or side by side, that is called beta biodiversity, The next we have another one called gamma biodiversity. Gamma biodiversity is the diversity of the species in several ecosystems existing over a large geographical area, That is called gamma biodiversity, Now for the beta diversity is the diversity of the species in two ecosystems which are side by side. Now that is measured by a phenomena called Sorensen's concept. Sorensen's concept is determined by means of the formula beta diversity is equal to 2C by S1 plus S2. It is 2C by S1 plus S2. S1 is diversity of organisms in one ecosystem. S2 is diversity of organisms in another ecosystem which is in the vicinity of the first one here now. 2C is the organisms that are common to both ecosystems. 2C is the organisms that are common to both S1 and S2 ecosystems. So there is a Sorensen's concept here now reflects as about the beta diversity here now, where beta diversity is equal to 2C by S1 and S2. S1 organisms of an ecosystem, S2 is organisms of the ecosystem which is nearer to the first one or in the vicinity of the first one, and 2C is the organisms that are common to both ecosystems. The next is gamma diversity, gamma biodiversity. It is a diversity of organisms of several ecosystems which are existing over a large geographical area. That is called gamma biodiversity here. Next, the other characteristics of the ecosystem diversity, ecological diversity, biotope. Biotope is a habitat where there is a uniformity. It is a habitat where there is a uniformity in distribution of fauna and flora. Uniformity in distribution of fauna and flora. Uniformity in the distribution of fauna and flora, and uniformity in the environmental conditions. In a particular habitat, if there is a uniformity with regard to the environmental conditions and uniformity with regard to distribution of fauna and flora, that can be called biotope. Then next we have another one called ecoregion. Ecoregion is a natural habitat with a characteristic fauna and flora. It is a natural habitat present in a particular geographical area with a characteristic fauna and flora and with the characteristic environmental conditions. For instance, tundra biome we take where the environmental conditions, the characteristic sunlight is available only for 6 months and there is a complete darkness for 6 months. So the abiotic factors prevalent in that region are also very unique. So with the unique environmental conditions and unique fauna and flora surrounded by natural boundaries, surrounded by natural boundaries rather than artificial boundaries, can be called ecoregion. So it is a natural ecological region here now, surrounded by natural boundaries here now, with the characteristic fauna and flora and environmental conditions, can be called ecoregion here now. The next you have ecozone, another concept called ecozone. Ecozone is also called biogeographical realm. Biogeographical realms, these are the larger geographical areas present in the biosphere here now, with the historic and evolutionary descendant type of organisms, historic and evolutionary descendants of organisms. That is, in a particular habitat here now, the organisms are existing over a long period of time here now, okay, with a long evolutionary history, and if there is a unique distribution of organisms in that particular habitat, okay, surrounded by the natural boundaries, that area can be called biogeographical realm or ecozones. Now the entire earth is divided into about 5 to 6 biogeographical realms. You got number 1 Ethiopian region, Nearctic region, Neotropical region, Australian region, and Asia. So Ethiopian, Nearctic, Neotropical, Australian, Asian, and Palearctic. So that there are about say 6 biogeographical realms here now: Ethiopian region, Nearctic region, Neotropical region, Australian region, Asiatic continent, and Palearctic region. So these are the biogeographical realms that are identified in the biosphere here now, with the characteristic fauna and flora with a long evolutionary history here now, with the characteristic fauna and flora with a long evolutionary history here now. And all these biogeographical regions or realms are separated from each other by certain barriers, oceanic barriers or land barriers, so on and so forth here now. Okay. Now the evil quartets, the 4 reasons which are responsible for the loss of biodiversity in India as well as in the entire world. are considered as evil quartets, the four main reasons, for the loss of biodiversity. Under this, first you have habitat destruction, and fragmentation. This is the first evil quartet that is responsible for loss of biodiversity in India and even other countries. Loss of biodiversity due to habitat destruction and fragmentation. Now, because of increase in size of population because of rapid industrialization, increased automobiles and all the other needs, there is a large scale destruction of the habitat. For instance, tropical rainforests, once they were occupying 14% of the entire globe, because of the habitat destruction now it is reduced to hardly 4%. Okay, from 14% it is reduced to only 4% because of cutting down of the trees okay, deforestation, so on and so forth. That is the best example for habitat destruction tropical rainforests. Same way, once Amazon forest Amazon forest, once it was considered as the lung of the planet. Amazon forest is also being destroyed. The trees are being cut down ruthlessly, okay, for several reasons. Mainly the trees are being cut to grow soya bean, and the trees are being cut to grow animal fodder. Animal fodder and the grasslands. So Amazon forest, the lung of the planet, once it was considered, now that is being ravaged because of indiscriminate agricultural practices, like the people over there they cut down the trees to grow soya bean, or the people present in the region they cut down the trees to grow different kinds of grasses or animal fodder. Okay, the next, habitat destruction also takes place because of pollution. Pollution is the main threat for habitat destruction. Several reasons can be attributed to this under pollution. The next is fragmentation. Fragmentation may be again of two types geographical fragmentation and man-made fragmentation. Geographical fragmentation, the fragmentation that occurs by natural methods like the formation of deserts, formation of grasslands, okay, then maybe earthquakes or maybe forest fires, volcanic eruptions, all of them are responsible for natural fragmentation or geographical fragmentation. Man-made fragmentation is caused because of laying of roads across the forests, because of mining operations, okay, because of all other human activities, there is a fragmentation of the entire biodiversity. And most of the mammals and birds, they require large territories, for the breeding purpose and for all the other activities, because of the fragmentation, the territory is being affected to a larger extent. So all these come under habitat destruction and fragmentation, like tropical rainforests. Once they were up to 14% of the earth's surface, now reduced to only 4%. Amazon forest is being cut to grow grasslands and soya bean. Pollution hazards are also responsible for habitat destruction. Fragmentation may be a natural or man-made. Both of them are responsible for fragmentation, which indirectly affects the wild fauna and flora. And the second evil quartet, overexploitation, it is the second major evil quartet responsible for habitat degradation in India. And because of the exploitation of the organisms indiscriminately, all the organisms present on the earth, they have come to a stage where they are extinct now, or some of them are critically endangered, some of them are endangered. I would give some important examples for this. Like cheetah in India has become extinct. Cheetah in India has become extinct because of indiscriminate killing. Then dodo in Mauritius dodo in Mauritius has become extinct once again because of indiscriminate killing. Then passenger pigeon in America has become extinct because of overexploitation. Stellar sea cow has become extinct in Russia. Then Tasmanian wolf has become extinct in Australia. There are many organisms which have become extinct. The most important I am putting before you, which is important for EAMCET and all other exam point of view. Like cheetah has become extinct in India because of indiscriminate killing. Dodo in Mauritius, then passenger pigeon in America, then stellar sea cow in Russia, and Tasmanian wolf in Australia. They become extinct because of indiscriminate killing or over exploitation. Now the third evil quadrant here now responsible for degradation is invasion of alien species. Certain animals from other countries are introduced into India for a good cause or a good purpose, but ultimately they have become a kind of nuisance or headache for the Indians, or at the same time for the farmers of India, okay, causing extinction of indigenous varieties, posing a threat for the very existence of indigenous varieties of India. I shall give some important examples, invasion of alien species, like African catfish, Clarius garipinus, African catfish Clarius garipinus caused the extinction of several indigenous catfish. Okay, when it was introduced into USA in America, it caused the death of several indigenous catfish. The next one is Nile perch, introduced into Lake Victoria. East Africa, introduced into Lake Victoria of East Africa. It caused death of more than 200 different species of cichlids. Caused death of more than 200 different varieties of cichlid varieties of fish. Then same way some plants, like Eichhornia was introduced into India by Europeans. Eichhornia, water hyacinth commonly called, it was introduced in India by Europeans, for its beautiful flowers, but indirectly it has become a kind of weed, a super weed in India, growing at the expense of all the indigenous plants, and causing water pollution in wetlands, at the same time even clogging different types of water bodies and all. Then next one is lantana, Spanish flag it is commonly called. It is also a kind of exotic variety introduced in India. Number 3, carrot grass, it is also called Congress grass, that is Parthenium. It is also considered as a super weed in India here now. So Eichhornia, water hyacinth. Number 2, lantana, Spanish flag. Number 3, carrot grass or Congress grass here now, or Parthenium histocarpa. It is also a kind of weed here now, introduced from other countries in India. Okay. Then the fourth evil quadrant that caused biodiversity loss, biodiversity degradation. The fourth quadrant, evil quadrant that caused biodiversity degradation is co-extinction. This is the fourth reason or the factor which is considered the fourth evil quadrant that caused loss of biodiversity. co-extinction here now. The best example for co-extinction is Clavaria major. Clavaria major is a plant here now in Mauritius. It became extinct when the dodo bird became extinct here now. When dodo bird was alive here now, it would eat the seeds of Clavaria major plant. It would eat the seeds of Clavaria major and thereby helped in germination of the seeds. So when the seeds were made to pass through the alimentary canal of dodo bird here now, all the seeds were made very soft here now, so that they could easily germinate when they were defecated here now. But when the bird became extinct here now, this plant Clavaria major also became extinct, which is the best example for co-extinction. When one organism becomes extinct, the organism that is dependent on that also becomes extinct over a period of time here now, which is called co-extinction. So like that, there are 4 evil quadrants here now, which are responsible for loss of biodiversity. Number 1, habitat loss and degradation. Number 2, the invasion of alien species. Number 3, over-exploitation, and number 4, co-extinction here. Now next we will talk about now biodiversity conservation. Conservation of biodiversity. Under this, first we will talk about in situ conservation. In situ conservation is also called on-site conservation. On-site conservation, where the organisms, that is plants and animals, are conserved. Okay, certain steps are taken here now to conserve all those animals wherever they are existing here, without disturbing their natural habitat here now, without disturbing their various characteristics here now. Okay, if the organisms are conserved wherever they live or wherever they exist, it is called in situ conservation here now, or on-site conservation. Under this, first you have here now biodiversity hotspots. Biodiversity hotspots are the ecological regions here now spread over the entire world with the characteristic fauna and flora here now, because of certain species abundance and species richness here now, okay, and unique type of species in particular habitats here now. Those areas are identified as biodiversity hotspots here now. The concept of biodiversity hotspot was introduced by Norman Mailer. There are nearly 34 biodiversity hotspots are identified all over the world, and India, Indo-Burma, Western Ghat, Himalayan region, are identified as the most important biodiversity hotspots. Indo-Burma, Western Ghat, Himalayan region are identified as the most important biodiversity hotspots. So even Indo-Burma, Western Ghat, Himalaya and Sri Lankan regions are identified as the most important biodiversity hotspots, and the concept was started by Norman Mailer. Around 34 of them are identified all over the world here now. Biodiversity hotspots are known for species richness and species evenness here now, species endemism. Okay. Then the next one under in situ conservation is national parks. National parks are the restricted habitats or the forest areas here now, where both fauna and flora are protected here now. Not only the flora, even fauna is also protected here now. Then this about 91 of them are identified as national parks, okay, in India. In the national parks, different kinds of forestry operations are strictly prohibited here now. Forestry byproducts and all, they cannot be collected from the national parks here now. Okay, that entire habitat zone is exclusively meant for wild fauna and flora. The first started national park in India is Jim Corbett National Park. It is the first started national park which is there in Uttaranchal here now. Then the next one is Gir National Park, which is famous for lions. It is there in Gujarat. Then next you have Kaziranga National Park. It is there in Assam. It is known for one-horned rhinoceros here now. Then in Telangana district also, that is you have Kasu Brahmananda Reddy National Park. Brugwani National Park. Mahavir Harin Vanasthali National Park. So these three of them are situated in Hyderabad here now. Kasu Brahmananda Reddy National Park, KB National Park it is also called, Mrugwani National Park and Mahavir Harin Vanasthali National Park. All three of them are situated in Hyderabad here now. They are also identified as national parks. So a national park is meant for both fauna and flora, and it is demarcated by distinct boundaries here now, and distinct different types of forestry operations here now are strictly prohibited here now, and private entrepreneurship is also strictly prohibited entering into the national park area here now. So such restricted forest zones can be called national parks here now. Next you have sanctuaries. Sanctuary is a forest area which is meant exclusively only for fauna, that is only wild animals are protected in this here now. Such areas can be called sanctuaries. About 500 sanctuaries are identified in India, and a sanctuary, the boundaries are not clearly demarcated here now, they are roughly demarcated for a sanctuary here now. In a national park the boundaries are clearly demarcated, whereas sanctuary the boundaries are not clearly demarcated. National park is meant for both fauna and flora, whereas a sanctuary is exclusively meant for fauna here now. In a sanctuary, forestry operations can be carried out with a prior permission from the forest officials, as long as such operations do not disturb the habitat of wild fauna. Such operations can be carried out here now by people here now. So such areas can be called sanctuaries. Around 500 of them are identified as sanctuaries in India here now. The next you have biosphere reserves. Biosphere reserves, about 17 of them are identified in India here now. They were started under MAB program, Man and Environment program here now, Man and Biosphere program by UNESCO in the year 1976. They were started under MAB program by UNESCO in the year 1975. In the year 1975, Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve is the first started biosphere reserve in India. Then apart from the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve here now, Western Ghat, Sundarbans are the most important biosphere reserves in India. Seshachalam forest is the latest declared the 17th biosphere reserve declared in India here now. And in the biosphere reserve, at the same time, even in national park also, three geographical areas are identified. The central zone of a biosphere reserve or the national park is called core zone, which is exclusively meant for fauna and flora here now, and people are not allowed to enter into that core zone here. It is demarcated by a kind of fencing and all, where the densely arranged trees are present and exclusively meant for fauna and flora. That is called core zone. The next to core zone you have a area called buffer zone. Buffer zone is meant for scientific analysis and meant for forest officials here now. Okay, scientific research also can be carried out here now by the research scholars in the buffer zone here now. Little human activity is permitted in the buffer zone here now. Then the outermost zone of a biosphere reserve or a national park is called manipulative zone. Okay, manipulative zone or transitional zone here now. That manipulative zone or transitional zone is meant for human settlements here now, where the tribal people and all the other poor people have their settlements in the manipulative zone, and grazing, then foraging, then cultivation, all of them can be carried out in the manipulative zone. Then apart from that here now, manipulative zone is also meant for the recreation purpose, where the people go and watch all the wild animals entering from the manipulative zone. Sometimes they are allowed to enter even into the buffer zone here now. So it's meant for recreation purpose, scientific research purpose. Manipulative zone and buffer zone are used here now. So the central zone exclusively meant for wild animals and the plants, where the people are not allowed to enter into that, is a core zone. The next to that you have a buffer zone here now, where mostly scientific operations go on. In the scientific research operations go on in the buffer zone here now. Outermost is the manipulative zone, meant for tribals and all the other people to have their huts and to have graze their cattle here now. Then forestry, then agriculture purposes, they can be agricultural activities can be carried out in the manipulative zone here now. Okay. Then next you have another one, sacred groves. Sacred groves are the forest areas here now. Some religious sanctity is attached to them here now. The people living in that particular area prevent others from felling off the trees here now, contaminating the area and polluting that area here now. Okay, they believe that particular area as a sacred area here now. Okay, in India there are about 5 areas identified as sacred groves here now, like Aravalli Hills in Rajasthan and Gujarat here now, Chanda area in Madhya Pradesh, Sarguja and Bastar area in Chhattisgarh, Western Ghats in Karnataka and Maharashtra, Khasi and Jayantiya hills in Meghalaya are identified as sacred groves. Apart from this, there are sacred lake also. So apart from the lakes here now, the sacred groves here now, there are sacred lakes here now. Some kind of religious sanctity is attached to them also. Here there is a sacred lake called Pushkar Lake in Rajasthan, is considered as a sacred lake. Then Kechio Palri in Sikkim, Kechio Palri Lake in Sikkim is also identified as a sacred lake. At the same time, people even identify Ganges is also a sacred lake, and the most important are the sacred lake here now. So they are also prevented from being contaminated, by the people, those who visit that particular area. Okay, so these are all these come under in situ conservation. So under in situ conservation, you have learnt about biodiversity hotspots, number 1, number 2 national park here now, number 3 sanctuary, number 4 biosphere reserve, and number 5 sacred groves and lakes.